In the early 70s, a group of students at C.W. Baker High School in Baldwinsville, New York, set out to build a radio station that would create a unique broadcasting experience, not only for them, but for a multitude of generations to come. Nearly a half-century later, it's time to hear firsthand from those who went behind the mic, telling the stories of how this station changed their lives, both in the studio and beyond, as we celebrate 50 years of broadcasting excellence on WBXL 90.5 FM. This is The Buzz Goes Gold.
Welcome to another episode of The Buzz Goes Gold. Thank you very much for checking out the podcast if you haven't already. Now, today we're going to get a little bit closer to my time at the station. Here we have Alli Mincher from the class of 2004, which is 20 years ago today. Not today, but 20 years ago. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jordan. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I'll start by asking you, like I do previous guests here, what made you interested in broadcasting? How did you find out about the radio station, and why did you join in the first place?
Yeah, great questions. I don't have a lot of specific answers because it was so long ago. It's a little bit vague in my memory, but from what I recall, I was first interested in joining WBXL because I knew that I wanted to go into journalism or communications. And as far as I remember, back when I was at Baker, we did not have like a student newspaper of any sort. So WBXL seemed like, the broadcasting class seemed like just a natural fit at the time. So I was curious and interested, knowing that I wanted to pursue education and a career in some sort of related field. So that was why I initially joined. It just sounded interesting and a little bit relevant to me.
Yep. So take me back to the first day of, you obviously took the class.
Yep.
What were your first impressions? And you had Peter Hahn. So at this time, we were out of the Al Jenner era, and Peter Hahn was the official teacher or advisor of the station.
Yeah. Peter Hahn, that's right. That jogged the memory. He was like really interesting. He had a really great personality, like really charismatic. I remember in his class, it wasn't just radio. It wasn't just broadcasting. Like of all the classes I took in high school, I remember that one feeling like the most relevant because he did spend time talking about like, preparing for your career, for the real world. Like, I remember him going over really specific things, like the best way to sign your name. Like I had adjusted my signature based on some of the tips that he said. I think he was one of the first teachers that really talked about like resumes, like what they are, why they're important, like best practices. So the things that I recall from his class were like these more broad career tips, more so than just the basics of like, being on air. Like obviously we learned all of like that we needed to know as far as FCC regulations, how to handle ourselves in the studio and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention it because as you were telling me, those are the things that I remembered. It was not just about radio, not just about broadcasting. This was also the first time that you had to do you had to prepare some sort of speech and present it to the rest of the class. So this taught you more than just getting on the air and doing radio. There were a lot of life lessons that you learned, which we'll get to in a minute. But first of all, so let's go into the studio. You were trained. When were you on? Do you remember? Was it a night shift or was it during the day?
I actually had a morning show. So if I recall, I want to say it was like Wednesday mornings. It was once a week. I went into the school early and I had the morning show before classes began.
Okay. Alone or with co-hosts?
I was a solo host. So I had my own morning show, no co-hosts. I did have, I think starting junior year and definitely senior year, I had a friend who rode to school with me since I drove myself. And She was not a part of the station. She was never on air, but she would hang out in the studio with me on the mornings of my show, just because I was her ride to school.
What was that like? What did she think of it?
She would usually just like sit there and do her homework, and she was really quiet, at the times that I was on air. Because I was a solo host, there wasn't a lot of like entertainment from my end. Like it wasn't a lot of like banter that you hear from other shows where there's multiple people. Typically I would just cover, maybe some of the big headlines from that morning and like the weather, but I usually kept my on-air segments pretty brief, and mostly was just excited to like play music and be there and really just get the experience.
Okay. I didn't ask anybody. Name one favorite what is your top 3 favorite songs that you played?
Let's see, back then, so this would have been like 2002 to 2004. This might not have been very new or relevant, but like I feel like I played a lot of Oasis at the time.
Oh,
yeah, like Wonderwall. Yeah, I'm trying to remember it. I think that we were able to bring in our own CDs, but we had to be very aware, like they couldn't be explicit, right?
yeah, that makes sense.
Hard, because a lot of my own music collection, was explicit, so I wasn't able to bring that in. So I was playing a lot of, what we already had programmed by the station. Yeah.
Now, what were the machines? I know that when I was in there, they used what are called instant replay machines, which are essentially glorified iPods, where there would be songs loaded in the station. What you'd have to do is you have to punch in a number, and then you play it. I don't know what it was like during that time, but are you recalling any of this at all, or was
yeah,
a little bit different?
It was like, I remember that I can like visualize the machine, right? It had like a very small display for like text only, and it was like a keyboard type thing. Is that the same one? I know you were there probably a few years after.
Yes. I started Baker in the fall of 2004, and I graduated in 2007. So That's the equipment that we used. So I would assume that you probably used that same thing. But again, it was very old. It's very antiquated now.
Yes.
Essentially, it's a glorified MP3 player. But again, so let me just explain to you one more time for the listening audience who doesn't really know what it is. It's called an instant replay machine, and it had all these different buttons, and the music was the music director, somebody must have recorded music into the system, and there were no playlists back then. You were essentially free to play whatever you wanted. And what you would do here on the shift is there would be this book containing all the different songs, and each song was assigned to a number. In order to play that song, you'd look it up in the book, and then on the machine, you have to enter the 3-digit number code of that song that you wanted to play. And then when it was time to play it, you would just hit the play button. That's very antiquated compared to what we have today. I've been a member of, after graduation, I was a member of WJPZ Z89. Do you know that station?
Yeah.
And I was blown away by the technology and the equipment they use at that station. And we'll get more into that later on and what you're doing professionally in your career. But do you still know anybody from the station, or who else? Before I ask you that, who else do you remember from your time, even if you didn't do a show with them or not?
I'm trying to remember names. So I was not really, I was one of those people, like in high school, I was involved a little bit in a bunch of different things, and they were all completely like unrelated. And I do remember back in the early 2000s, it being, relatively cliquey to a degree. So I wasn't really close friends with anybody else in radio. Like, we were in homeroom together. We obviously had taken the class together, and we were like involved with the radio together. But my involvement also wasn't like super deep beyond that. I haven't stayed in touch with anybody. I'm trying to even remember names. It was like Tom, Aaron, Kelly, maybe were like the main people very involved in that time.
I was going to throw out two names and see if you remembered, like Tom. I do know who Tom is. Because
Okay.
I spoke to when I was at ninth grade at Durkee, he was the one who came in and spoke in my English class about the station.
Yeah. So my maiden name is Williams. So Mincher is my married name. So when I was in school, it was Alli or Allison Williams. And yeah, so Tom Williams, right? So we had the same last name, like a lot of classrooms, like graduation, things that are always alphabetically by last name. That was usually how Tom and I would end up, in the same space frequently. That's why that name sounds really familiar.
Do you remember what he did? Did he have a leadership position or?
I think so. I don't remember a specific title, but I do remember him being pretty involved with the station back then.
And then another name, do you have Katrina Bush?
Oh yes, yeah. I think she was in my class as well.
What have you been doing after graduation of high school? Where after WBXL, where did your career path or life after high school take you?
Yeah, it's been a fun journey since then. I left Baker and I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, to study journalism. I was only there for one semester, and then I transferred to SUNY Brockport in Western New York. And I stayed there. I live in Rochester today, so I stayed in that area. And yeah, professionally so in college, I did not continue on with radio. At Brockport, we had a really great, college radio station. But again, I sort of like, WBXL and like radio broadcasting was just sort of like my most journalism adjacent option in high school. So in college, I did study journalism. I wrote for the college newspaper, and I was involved in a lot of different, activities there. Public relations club. I kind of wanted to keep my options open, but I knew I wanted to do something in media or media adjacent in college. So I graduated and I ended up with a career in the technology, like software space.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So for 7 years, shortly after college, I worked for a small software company based in Rochester that provided a DIY audio tour platform for museums and parks, gardens, cultural sites all around the country and around the world. So that was a really fun place to grow my career, especially because what I was doing in that company was helping these visitor destinations tell stories to their visitors through audio. So like super relevant to, my time at the radio station, like learning to speak on air, like learning, how to tell stories essentially that people want to listen to. And then that became a huge part of my career during that time as well. I think I was there from about 2011 until 2019. And then moved on from that role to take a position in marketing. I was in the IoT space for a while, kind of doing like marketing generalist role before moving into content marketing. And now I am in product marketing for a pretty large software company based in Southern California.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you're still in Rochester, or did you move to the West Coast?
Oh, no, I'm still in Rochester. Yep. So I'm working remotely. Yeah, and I love it.
Okay. My younger sister is on Harvard Street.
Oh, okay. So she's right. Yeah, I lived right in that area for a while, right after college. That's a fun area downtown.
We also lived before moving to Baldwinsville. Our family lived in the Irondequoit, up in East Irondequoit.
Awesome. Yeah, we almost moved to Irondequoit, but we ended up in Pittsford. Just thanks to the way that the housing market was at the time. But we lived in Charlotte for several years, so right on the other side of the river from Irondequoit.
Okay, the mall there is unfortunately.
Sad. Yeah.
Anyway, while you're in the area, you should check out this other radio station, WDKX 103.9. If you haven't heard it already, they play a lot of hip hop, R&B, and throwback music. So if you haven't checked it out already, I strongly suggest that you tune into 103.9 WDKX.
Yeah, definitely. I think that station is right downtown, like East Main Street area. I used to have an internship down on Prince Street, so it's like I used to drive by that station sometimes. If they're still in the same location as they were, over 10 years ago.
They probably are. So you mentioned, for example, using some of the skills about telling a story on the air in your in the museum audio tour type of thing. Can you please share what other lessons have you learned from your time at the station that you still apply today, even though it doesn't have anything to do with a media or a broadcasting career? But please, what other life lessons did you learn and you still carry with you to this day?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned one earlier, probably the biggest one, right, is public speaking. That's been just a huge part of my career, whether it's giving presentations at conferences and trade shows that I've done, or I once had to present on behalf of a client to like the town council, halfway across the country. I've hosted webinars. That's a huge part of my job still today in marketing is like, how do we reach our customers and give them the information that they find useful and relevant? And webinars have been a great platform for us that really resonates. And so being able to speak, to a group of people, either on camera or off, all of those skills, like they started, in that classroom with Mr. Hun, and they were developed through my time in WBXL and beyond.
Okay, so I don't think I've asked this before, but there's a first time for everything. Are you glad, looking back today, if you had not done the station, how would your life be? Would it be any different or the same? Essentially, what I'm getting at is, looking back, are you glad that you took the effort to join the station looking back 20 years ago, or wouldn't it have impacted where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And 100%, like, so glad that I did it. I think at the time I didn't take it super seriously. And it was like a small part of my high school experience. It was sort of just like this interesting thing to do that kind of felt relevant. It was almost like a resume builder in my mind at the time, but, like socially wasn't something that I was super invested in. And looking back, I feel like it was one of the most influential activities in my, in my career path, in my personal and professional development. Like it was very impactful in leading me to where I am today. But I would never have thought so at the time. It was just kind of this fun little thing that I did.
Okay, that's very interesting. I only say that because the station experience can shape anybody in different ways. For me, for example, I learned a lot of life lessons, including mainly commitment, and I'll get to that because what I did was I interviewed. I had a Friday afternoon show, and my claim to fame was I would bring in people from outside in the community. I would also interview fellow students, but I also interviewed a lot of people from outside the community, and I would bring them in to the station and ask them about what was going on in the community and how they played a role in serving the Baldwinsville community. And so that allowed me to continue on the community service aspect of the station. One of the one of the missions of WBXL is to provide a community service, and if you don't do that, then we may lose our license. So I was able to get that going, but I was a little bit disappointed when the guests that I planned for a show, for example, they said they were going to show up, but they didn't show up. So that was devastating to me, but I learned from that. I learned that you have to be adaptable, and even though you want certain things to go a certain way, they're not always going to go a certain way. You got to learn how to deal with that and just move on. The show must go on.
Absolutely. And that feels very relevant to me in my field as well. Like whether it's, you're having asking a customer to join you on a webinar or at an event that you're doing and you have people back out. It's like nothing's more frustrating, but being able to experience that and move through that and continue on, right? The show must go on, like you said. So what a great skill, right? And it's great that that's frustrating when it happens, no matter when. But like learning to deal with those things at such a young age, like as a teenager, gets you a leg up, I think. Moving through your career.
Yes, I would agree. So what other things were you involved in back in, so aside from WBXL, like for example, were you part of the marching band or another group or club or organization?
Yeah, so I was on the women's crew team, actually. So all 4 years of high school, that team started when I was a freshman. So it was fun to be in the first group of seniors that were on the team for all 4 years of high school. That was probably the biggest activity for me and the one that I was the most involved in. I did carry on after graduation. I did row for my one semester at Marist on their Division I crew team. So rowing was just probably the biggest part of my high school experience. But like I said, I kind of dabbled in a lot of different things. Looking back on my time in high school, this wasn't an extracurricular per se, but I took photography classes at Baker, and that was something that I was always super interested in and wanted to pursue. But like radio, it was something I wasn't super involved in. It was just kind of this interesting thing to me, where I never felt like I fit in really with like the other folks that did radio at the time and were probably more involved than I was. I also kind of felt like I didn't really fit in photography classes because that was a much more artistic crowd, and I sort of took photography in place of art classes because I'm not particularly gifted with pencils or paints. But give me a camera and, I'm very comfortable. So those were the things that I remember like caring about and being interested in and being involved in some level.
Interesting. Do you still take pictures today? Do you have a link to your portfolio or anything like that?
Yeah. So, mostly, again, I think that I didn't stick with photography in any sort of official way after graduating from high school. It's one of those things where like this, again, the skills that I learned, like in terms of like composition, back then, this was the early 2000s. People were still shooting on 35 millimeter, but like switching to digital. And we were still, I know that right after I graduated, a new wing of the school had opened and there was a brand new photography classroom and darkroom. And I'm sure everything was much, much more updated. But like, we were still kind of doing it the old fashioned way and like developing our film and then printing our photos in the darkroom. It was all black and white photography, which I thought at the time was just like very cool and artistic, even though I knew that was not widely used outside of probably a very like niche artistic space of photographers that I knew I wasn't going into. Again, like journalism was sort of the path that I wanted to go down. I do have a degree in journalism. And so like, I think for me, it was always about capturing a moment or telling a story. And that's what interested me most about photography. So like that kind of played a role in my career. I think like in some of my marketing roles, I have run social media accounts. So like sharing images for the company, kind of managing the brand, all of that, like is made better by some of the skills and the concepts that I learned in my photography classes at Baker.
Okay. Getting back on the journalism thing. So what were senior year or when you were at Baker, what did you want to do? What was your dream job back then? What was your dream job back then?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a print journalist. Like I wanted to write for newspapers or magazines. I think I gravitated more towards magazines. Like I wanted to write feature stories, lifestyle stuff, but I was also always kind of drawn into like just like the allure of like investigative journalism, right? Like very inspired by like the Woodwards and Bernsteins of history, right? That always fascinated me. I think like from an early age, like I was told that there wasn't a lot of money to be made in radio or in journalism for that matter. But again, it was like that draw of investigative journalism was always so interesting and fascinating to me that I wanted to pursue that path. And then throughout college, I had some internships in like nonprofits and in media relations, and I started taking public relations courses. And at the time when I was at SUNY Brockport, they did not have a public relations major. They had some tracks, so you could take public relations classes and either be a communications major or be a journalism major, but they didn't have a dedicated major at the time. And this seems to be a theme in my life. Just as I was graduating Brockport, I believe they actually did start a dedicated PR program, maybe even with an actual major. So I stuck with journalism as my major, but took a lot of PR classes and kind of kept like, I think by the time I graduated, my mindset had shifted to like, and also the other thing about being a journalism major in the early 2000s was like every single class started with like, welcome to Journalism 201. Print media is dying. So it was a very interesting time to study journalism, right? Because like I started my first Twitter account because I had to for a college class, and I started my first blog in a college class. And those are things, like as a marketing manager, right? One of my things that I did in content marketing was I was solely in charge of a corporate blog, and I had to, write and publish blogs twice a week, which looking back was a pretty frequent cadence considering everything else I had on my plate at the time. But so it was like during college where that dream changed. And I was like, I can take all of these skills that a journalist has to know, and I could apply it in the corporate world, right? Whether I was thinking that might be something like media relations or public relations. And I ended up in marketing. And, some people go into marketing with a business degree, and some people like come in through communications or media or somewhere else.
Okay, I like how you say that, because it sounds like you're taking the skills you learned through radio, WBXL, and through your journalism, and you're using that to apply to something that you're really interested in today.
Yeah.
One more. I have actually three more questions, but we'll start with something that I brought up as you were talking about print. You say print media, or you heard that print medium could be dying, but the point of I'm trying to get across is a lot of people say that radio, like print medium, is not going to be around. It's also dead. It's not as prevalent as it used to be. However, I seem to argue that things like radio and print media, they're still alive and they're still stronger than ever. Please, what's your take on the state of uh, radio and print journalism today, and where do you see it? Do you think it's dead, or do you think it's still alive and kicking? Your perspective, please.
Yeah, definitely. Another great question. I think that it's shifting, and it's certainly not what it once was, right? Both print and radio. And we could like talk about the why, right? I think a huge part of it is the shifting technologies. Along with the shifting technologies, right? Consumer habits and expectations and desires are changing, right? Like, I mean, I think the case can be made that attention spans today are not what they, were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is due to like the shifting of media consumption. We want like, even as a marketer, right? I have to be in tune to like what types of media people are consuming and how to best reach our audiences, and we're leaning towards like video format and shorter videos, like shorter is better, Twitter changed the dialogue around, written content, like messages had to be shorter if you wanted to reach your audience effectively. And so, over the past couple decades, like newsrooms shrank. I'm sure radio station staffs did as well. There's a lot of media ownership consolidation, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But then at the same time, these other opportunities open up that are like related, if not overlapped. So podcasting has taken off in recent years, and here we are today, right? That feels very relevant and very radio adjacent, right? So somebody with broadcasting experience could probably find a really natural fit in the world of podcasts. Mm-hmm. And where print media, the physical newspapers as well as newsroom staffs have both been shrinking. Digital content is on the rise. And I think journalists that learn to pivot to blogging, we're ahead of that and probably still finding relevant and exciting work today.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, you have to go with the times. Think about where we were 20 years ago. Computers and the internet they had already taken off, but social media, I know Facebook. Did you know that Facebook, for example, got its infancy in 2003 and 4? And
I did.
There was MySpace and all that, but there was no Twitter or X. By the way, what do you think of Twitter changing its name?
Oh, listen, again, I'm coming from a marketing and a brand perspective. And when you reach the level of brand recognition that Twitter had accomplished, to throw it, people still say tweet. When your brand name becomes as ubiquitous as like it's a verb now that people use, like even beyond just that social media platform, like it's crazy to me to think that you would have a brand that has achieved what Twitter did and then switch it up overnight. I tend not to, I like to not throw my personal opinions around too much because people today are so divisive. But I found it a little shocking from a business standpoint to throw away all that Twitter has accomplished, again, purely from a branding standpoint. Like, again, when I was in college, we looked at things like Xerox and Kleenex and Coke, these brands that become part of our everyday language that like you don't use Xerox as just a brand name. You use it as a way of saying, can you make a copy of this? Like, can you go Xerox this? Like that type of brand recognition is what Twitter achieved. And I don't know, like, I guess we'll see what happens with X if people will start to shift their language. And I have a hard time even referring to it by its current.
I know their URL, the website name's the same.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is a brand doesn't disappear overnight, especially when you've accomplished everything that Twitter has. So there's so many things, right? URLs need to change. Like they're all like, and again, I come from the software space too. So it's been really fascinating to me. Anyways, I'm interested to see where it goes, but I did also leave the platform around that same time. So, but I had been like, I had only been using Twitter professionally for many years, running corporate accounts, not really so much using it for myself.
What are you on? Do you want me to? You can plug your social handles, and I'll include them in the description if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not super active on many platforms right now, but I am also actually so in addition to being in product marketing, I'm actually also a yoga teacher. So I do teach at a local studio here in Rochester, and we do live streaming virtual classes as well. So again, something else like being able to stand up in front of a room and lead a yoga class, wouldn't be possible without developing the public speaking skills, right? That started in the radio station. But mindful_Alli is my Instagram handle for my yoga and wellness account.
Okay, and if you will use if you could please either using the private chat here or sending me messages back on Facebook. I'll ask you for that later. Let's go quickly. We're going to wrap this up. Funny stories. Any funny stories from the radio station?
Oh, I'm trying to remember if there's any particular story that stands out. I mean, most of them are very personal. Like, I think the people that listened to my station the most were my parents. One time, my mom did tell me that it was my aunt's husband's birthday and asked if I could shout him out on air. And I did, but I accidentally said the name of my aunt's ex-husband. So that was, nobody would have known that except for me and my mom and my aunt and him. But nonetheless, I was mortified. It did not score me any brownie points in my family. Like, don't, if you're going to say the wrong name, don't let it be the ex-husband of the person who actually was listening for a birthday shout out on air.
Okay. I have one last comment. Speaking of software development, I've actually developed my own station just to catch you up on where I've been today. So I actually have a degree in IT, and I'm currently working in the IT field right now. But just on a whim, I learned how to do a JavaScript, and I already knew some HTML. So I actually hand-coded my own personal radio station that's on the online today, and it's Friday. We're recording this on a Friday night. I have a show tonight. If you're interested in tuning in, I'll put the link in the private chat. So I thought you'd be impressed to know that as a software developer, kind of, I hand-coded and developed my own personal station.
That's awesome. Congratulations. It's no easy feat. I always joke that I think like us older millennials, like all kind of dabbled in coding thanks to like the MySpace days, right? That's how I learned like what open tags and close tags were in HTML. But never got into coding myself. Huge respect for anybody that does, because again, just being in the software industry, I know I've worked for very small software startups and larger companies, and one wrong line of code can break an entire website that people rely on. So very impressive.
Okay, thank you. And if you're ever interested in tuning into a show, I put the URL in the StreamYard chat, so you'll have that. Anything else that you want to say before we wrap today?
No, I don't think I have anything else to share. Thanks so much for having me on. Glad to hear that WBXL is still around, still student. I love to see it. I hope everybody else that's involved is still having like the same impact, right? That it had for us. And even as I said, I didn't know it at the time, but it was a very influential part of my life.
Yes, and if you have any other people, friends, family, well, mostly friends, classmates, who you still keep in touch with, and you think they'd be great for guests on the podcast, please let them know. I'm trying to shoot for 2000 to 2019 at the moment. I have a lot of interested guests from the 80s and 90s, not to say that they're bad or anything, but if you could, please pass the word around.
Yeah, happy to spread the word.
Yep, and that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Buzz Goes Gold, a podcast celebrating 50 years of broadcasting excellence on WBXL 90.5 FM. This podcast is produced exclusively by the alumni of WBXL, with hosting duties by yours truly, Jordan Hayes, class of 07, and the intro voiced by Rick DiUlio. Many special thanks go out to WJPZ alumnus John Jag Gay, class of 2002, for the inspiration behind this podcast and his helpful tips and advice for making it go.